Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson. I stood at the edge of the veranda, a drink in hand, gazing out at the turquoise waters of William Fellowes' private island. The weekend had barely started, but the air already buzzed with an underlying tension I couldn't quite place. Lucy, my wife of 12 years, was across the deck, laughing a little too freely at something William had said. Her golden hair caught the light as she leaned in toward him, her smile dazzling. She'd always been charismatic, but tonight, something was different. "Mark. Come join us," she called, her voice warm and inviting. I forced a smile and made my way over. William turned to me, his gray eyes sharp, appraising. He exuded the kind of confidence that came with old money, effortless, calculated, dangerous. His casual linen shirt and tailored shorts somehow looked regal. I, on the other hand, felt like a kid in my polo shirt and khakis. "Your wife tells me you're the IT genius at the firm," William said, extending his hand. "Something like that," I replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, deliberate. "She's the one who actually talks to the clients, though." Lucy beamed. "It's easy when they're as charming as William." I glanced at her. Was it just me, or was there a new edge to her enthusiasm? The dinner that followed was sumptuous. Fresh lobster, grilled snapper, and tropical cocktails flowed freely. Conversation buzzed around the long table, filled with a mix of our firm's executives and their spouses. Everyone seemed entranced by our host. William played the room like a maestro, orchestrating laughter, banter, and intrigue with precision. But his attention kept circling back to Lucy. "She has a knack for connecting with people," William remarked to me at one point, his voice casual, his gaze anything but. I nodded, unsure how to respond. "She's always been good with people." The night wore on, and my unease deepened. Lucy, for all her grace and poise, seemed more animated around William than I'd seen her in years. Her laughter was a little louder, her gestures a little more animated. I tried to shake off the feeling, it was just a work trip, after all, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. By the time we retired to our bungalow, I was exhausted, both from the travel and the mental gymnastics of the evening. Lucy slipped into bed beside me, her movements light, almost giddy. She leaned over to kiss my cheek, her breath warm against my skin. "This is going to be a good weekend," she murmured. I wanted to believe her. I really did. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves crashing gently against the shore. Lucy was already up, sitting on the veranda with a cup of coffee, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She looked serene, almost too much so. "Morning," I said, stepping out to join her. She turned, her smile bright. "Sleep well?" "Not bad," I lied. We spent the day snorkeling and kayaking with the group. William was everywhere, leading the excursions, cracking jokes, making sure everyone had the time of their lives. And Lucy was always by his side. At one point, I caught them laughing over something, their heads tilted close together. A chill ran through me despite the tropical heat. That evening, during cocktails, William approached me again. This time, his demeanor was different, more focused, less jovial. "Mark, can we talk privately?" he asked, his tone light but insistent. "Sure," I replied, trying to mask my unease. He led me to a quieter corner of the veranda, away from the chatter of the group. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the polished wooden deck. "I have a proposal for you," he began, his voice low. My heart quickened. "Okay." Over the past few months, I've had the pleasure of working with Lucy. She's remarkable, intelligent, charming, a true asset to your firm. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And, if I may be frank, she's captivated me." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" "I'd like to spend the rest of the weekend with her," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Just her and me. No strings attached. And I'm willing to compensate you for the time you'd lose with her. I blinked, struggling to process his words. Compensate? Yes, he said smoothly. $100,000. Into your joint account. By tomorrow morning. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Then the anger bubbled up, sharp and hot. Are you serious? Completely. His expression was calm, almost smug. I understand this is unorthodox, but I believe in being upfront about what I want. And I want Lucy. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. And what makes you think she'd agree to this? His smile widened. She already has. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to storm out, to punch him, to do something, anything, but I forced myself to stay still. Losing my temper now wouldn't help. I needed time to think. Give me until tomorrow, I said, my voice tight. Of course, William said, his tone almost congratulatory. Take all the time you need. As I walked away, I felt his gaze on my back, heavy in knowing. The anger burned inside me, but underneath it was something colder, sharper. If William thought he could buy my dignity, he was in for a surprise. That night, the room felt suffocating. Lucy was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, replaying William's words in my mind. She already has. The phrase echoed like a taunt, each repetition slicing deeper. I turned to look at her. She looked peaceful, her golden hair splayed across the pillow, her lips slightly parted. How could she lie so easily, so completely? For years, I had believed in us, in the life we had built together. And now, in a single conversation, it felt like it had all been built on sand. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and stepped onto the veranda. The air was warm, the gentle hum of the waves a sharp contrast to the chaos in my head. I needed to think, to plan. Anger wasn't enough, it wouldn't undo the betrayal or strip William of his smug certainty. No, if I was going to confront this, I needed to be smart. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. One stood out, a chat with my brother, Chris. He was always the level-headed one, the problem solver. He'd know what to do. But what could I even say? Hey, Chris, turns out my wife agreed to a proposition from her boss. Any advice? I put the phone down without typing anything. This wasn't something I could share, not yet. It was humiliating enough to live it. Saying it out loud would make it all too real. The next morning, Lucy was her usual cheerful self. She hummed as she got ready, her movements quick and efficient. It was almost insulting how normal she seemed. You're up early, she said, glancing at me as she brushed her hair. Didn't hear you get out of bed last night. Just needed some air, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She gave me a quick smile. This place is amazing, isn't it? I could get used to this. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, it's something. At breakfast, William was already holding court, his charisma on full display. Lucy gravitated toward him almost immediately, laughing at his jokes, leaning in as he spoke. I stayed back, watching the two of them like a hawk. Every touch, every glance felt like a betrayal. Mark. William called, his voice smooth as silk. Join us. I walked over, keeping my expression calm. What's up? I was just telling Lucy about the plans for today. Thought you might like to join us for a little fishing trip. Lucy's eyes lit up. That sounds fun, doesn't it? Sure, I said, my tone clipped. The trip was a masterclass in tension. William was his usual charming self, spinning tales of his adventures while expertly casting his line. Lucy hung on his every word, her laughter ringing out over the water. I, on the other hand, could barely keep up the pretense. Every smile felt forced, every laugh hollow. At one point, William turned to me, his expression carefully neutral. "So, Mark, have you thought about our conversation?" My grip on the fishing rod tightened. "I have. And I'll let you know tonight," I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Take your time. No rush." As we headed back to the island, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, but now it was tempered by resolve. I wasn't going to let William or Lucy dictate the narrative. This was my life, and I was taking it back. That evening, I asked William for another private meeting. He looked pleased, almost smug, as he led me to his study. The room was as opulent as the rest of the island, dark wood, leather chairs, and a wall lined with books that looked like they'd never been touched. "So," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "Have you made a decision?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "I have a few conditions." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "First, I want the money transferred up front. All of it. No delays, no excuses." "Done," he said smoothly. "What else?" "I want discretion. No one finds out about this, not the firm, not the clients, no one." "Of course," he said, nodding. "Anything else?" I hesitated, letting the silence stretch. "I want a recording of this agreement. For my protection." His smile faltered for the first time, but only for a moment. "Fair enough. Shall we draft something up?" I nodded, pulling out my phone. "Let's start with this conversation." He hesitated, then shrugged. "If it puts your mind at ease." As he spoke, laying out his terms in detail, I hit record. My heart raced as I realized I was finally gaining the upper hand. This wasn't just about the money or the betrayal, it was about reclaiming my dignity. When the conversation was over, I saved the recording and stood. "I'll let you know when the transfer goes through." "Looking forward to it," he said, his smile returning. As I left the study, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. William thought he had won, but he had no idea what was coming. Later that night, Lucy climbed into bed beside me, her movements cautious. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. "Just tired," I replied, turning away. I could feel her eyes on me, searching for something, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on the plan forming in my mind. Tomorrow, the game would change. The next morning dawned bright and humid, the golden sunlight streaming through the shutters. I woke with a strange mix of clarity and dread, the recording from the previous night heavy in my pocket like a loaded weapon. Lucy was already up, humming softly as she dressed for the day. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. "Good morning," she said brightly when she saw me stir. "Sleep well?" "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. "What's the plan for today?" "Oh, Williams arranged a boat ride to one of the smaller islands nearby. It's supposed to have incredible views." Her eyes sparkled, but there was something guarded behind them. "Sounds great," I said, sitting up. "I'll join you." She hesitated, just for a moment. Actually, William thought it might be nice to split the group up. He's taking the women, and the men are doing something else, maybe snorkeling. The lie was almost laughable in its transparency. "That's fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'll stick to my own plans, then." Her relief was palpable. She kissed me lightly on the cheek before heading out, her demeanor unnervingly cheerful. As the door clicked shut behind her, my forced calm crumbled. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. But I wasn't going to let it break me. By mid-morning, the group had dispersed. The women, including Lucy, had boarded a sleek yacht with William at the helm, while the men were left to their own devices. I slipped away unnoticed, making my way to a secluded part of the island where I'd seen Margaret, William's wife, sunbathing the previous day. I found her on the veranda of her private bungalow, a cup of tea in hand. She looked up as I approached, her expression curious. Margaret was every bit as poised and elegant as her husband, but there was a warmth to her demeanor that William sorely lacked. "Mark," she said, setting her cup down. "To what do I owe this visit?" I hesitated, my pulse quickening. "I need to talk to you. It's about William." Her brow furrowed slightly, but she gestured for me to sit. "What is it?" I pulled out my phone, hesitating for only a moment before playing the recording. As William's voice filled the air, Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally to icy composure. When the recording ended, she sat back, her eyes narrowing. "Well," she said quietly. "That's quite something." "I thought you deserved to know," I said. "I don't know what he's told you about this weekend, but—" She held up a hand, silencing me. "Thank you, Mark. Truly. But I've known about William's proclivities for a long time. He has a way of making everyone feel like they're in on the secret while keeping the real truth hidden." Her candor took me aback. "Then why?" "Because appearances are everything," she said simply. "But this is different. He's escalated." Her calm unnerved me. "So what do you want to do?" She smiled faintly, a glint of steel in her eyes. "Oh, I'll handle William. But I suspect you have your own score to settle." "I do," I said, my voice firm. "Good," she said, standing. "Let's make sure neither of them forgets this weekend." When the yacht returned that evening, the atmosphere was different. William was still his charming self, but there was a tension in his movements, a flicker of unease in his eyes when they met mine. Lucy seemed quieter, too, her usual vibrancy dulled. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or something else, but either way, I didn't care. I had my plan, and nothing would derail it. That night, at dinner, Margaret struck the first blow. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said, raising her glass. Her smile was radiant, her voice clear. "To our host, William, for his unparalleled generosity. Truly, this has been a weekend to remember." The table erupted in cheers and clinking glasses, but Margaret wasn't finished. "And to the future," she added, her gaze locking on William's. "May it be as transparent as the waters of this beautiful island." William's smile faltered for just a moment, but it was enough. Lucy glanced at him, then at me, her brow furrowing. She could sense the undercurrent, even if she didn't understand it. After dinner, I found Lucy on the veranda, gazing out at the ocean. She didn't hear me approach, and for a moment, I simply watched her, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the stranger she'd become. "Mark," she said softly when she finally noticed me. "What's going on?" I stepped closer, pulling out my phone. "Why don't you tell me?" Her eyes widened as I played the recording. Her face drained of color, her hands trembling as William's voice filled the air. When it ended, she looked at me, her expression a mix of shock and desperation. "Mark, I can explain." "Don't bother," I said, cutting her off. "It's all there, Lucy. Every word. He said you agreed. Is that true?" She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to." "Stop," I said, my voice cold. "I've heard enough." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "Mark, please," she begged. "It was a mistake. I was caught up in the moment. I love you." "Love?" I laughed bitterly. "You call this love? Selling me out to a man like him?" Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. "I'll deal with you when we get home," I said, turning away. Until then, stay away from me. As I walked back inside, my heart ached, but my resolve was stronger than ever. Lucy had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The final day on the island dawned with an eerie stillness, as if even the waves and birds sensed the tension in the air. I spent the morning alone, avoiding the rest of the group. The confrontation with Lucy the night before had left me hollow, the anger that had burned so brightly now reduced to cold, bitter ash. Margaret had already made it clear she was handling William. What that meant, I wasn't sure, but I trusted her to exact her own brand of justice. My focus was on Lucy. On us. Or what was left of us. By midday, the group gathered for a farewell lunch on the main veranda. The meal was extravagant, as expected, but the mood was subdued. William was quieter than usual, his charm forced. Margaret, in contrast, was glowing, a quiet triumph radiating from her. Lucy sat beside me, her usual warmth replaced by a strained silence. As the servers brought out dessert, William stood to address the group. "I want to thank you all for joining me this weekend," he began, his voice as smooth as ever. "It's been a pleasure hosting such an exceptional group of individuals." Margaret interrupted, her tone sharp but pleasant. "And we want to thank you, William, for being such a transparent host." Her words hung in the air, charged with unspoken meaning. William's smile faltered for the briefest moment, but he recovered quickly. The rest of the group chuckled politely, oblivious to the barb. When the lunch concluded, Lucy pulled me aside. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine, her blue eyes wide with desperation. "Mark, please," she whispered. "Let's talk. Let's fix this." I stared at her, my resolve wavering. The anger had given way to an aching sadness that I couldn't shake. "Fix what, Lucy? This? Us? How do you come back from something like this?" She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Her words sounded sincere, but the betrayal lingered like a shadow between us. I nodded slowly. "We'll talk when we get home." It was a lie, but I couldn't bear to tell her the truth. "Not yet." That evening, as the group gathered for drinks before the flight back, I noticed Lucy slipping away toward the beach. Something about her demeanor struck me as off, her shoulders hunched, her steps hesitant. I hesitated, torn between following her and letting her have her space. Ultimately, I followed. The beach was deserted, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the sand. Lucy stood at the water's edge, staring out at the horizon. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her figure small against the vastness of the sea. "Lucy," I called, my voice soft. She turned slowly, her expression etched with pain. "I thought I'd be alone." "I couldn't let you be," I said, stepping closer. "Not like this." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" I didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't know how it got this far. I don't even know who I am anymore." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "But I know I've lost you. And I can't live with that." Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. "Lucy, what are you saying?" She took a step closer to the water, her gaze fixed on the waves. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything." Panic surged through me as I realized what she was about to do. "Lucy, stop." I lunged forward, grabbing her arm just as she stepped into the surf. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anguish and resignation. "Let me go, Mark. Please. I can't face this." "No," I said fiercely, pulling her back. "You don't get to run from this. You don't get to leave me like this." Her sobs racked her body as she collapsed against me, her strength gone. I held her tightly, the salt of her tears mixing with the ocean spray. "You're not alone," I whispered, my own tears falling freely. "No matter what, we face this together." For a moment, it felt like we could weather the storm. That maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But deep down, I knew the fractures in our foundation were too deep. We returned home, but the weight of the island lingered between us. Days turned into weeks, the silence in our house deafening. Lucy tried, oh, how she tried, to bridge the gap, to prove her love. But I couldn't see past the betrayal. One evening, as I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, Lucy came in. She looked fragile, her usual vibrancy dimmed. "I can't do this anymore," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've tried, but I can't keep hurting you. I think it's best if I go." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I couldn't argue. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She packed her things that night, leaving the house we had built together. As I watched her drive away, a hollow emptiness settled in my chest. The following morning, I found a letter on the kitchen counter. It was short, but every word was a dagger. "Mark, I'll always love you, but I know I don't deserve you. I hope one day you find someone who does. I'll never stop regretting what I did. Please don't stop living because of me." Months passed, but the ache never faded. The house felt too big, too quiet. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void, but nothing could erase the memory of her smile, her laugh, her touch. In the end, I realized that the worst part of betrayal wasn't the anger or the loss, it was the love that remained, haunting every corner of my heart.